Okay, we're going to get underway. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to our Friday night meeting. Welcome to all of you at home. I'm going to do some announcements first before we get underway. This I've had up on the screen. Remember, next week is our critique night. All you at home as well as here, up to 3 images. It's a lot of fun. We had a lot of fun in December when we did this. No judging allowed. We'll be able to do adjustments on the screen at the time. So just send 3 images. You don't even have to show up. Just send the images and whatnot. You could hide at home there as well. So a lot of fun. That's next week. Again, each image, just send to info@clevelandphoto.org. April 7th is Good Friday. Clubhouse will be closed. We're going to do the rebroadcast of Evoking Emotion by Michael Chinichi. Again, tremendous photographs in terms of just the angles he gets and whatnot. Takes ordinary things and are able just to get some phenomenal pictures just by how he approaches it. So it'll be a worthwhile presentation. April 14th, we'll have another live lecture, How to Take Better Bird Pictures by Alex Isengart, who's a Clevelander. His handle is Kid with a Sony. That's what he is on Instagram. You could find him there. And yes, he is 15. Yes, highly, I looked at some of his pictures and it's hard. It's hard when he's only 15. But it should be very, very interesting. Then April 21st, our required annual meeting and election of officers and board members. Membership, we briefed on current direction and state of the club. A good time to direct questions and suggestions to the club leadership, who will be here then, and we'll have our election of officers that night. Our next SIG meeting coming up April 6th, first Thursday of the month, with Dave Bush. We're going to talk on astrophotography, everything you need for astrophotography. It should be an interesting talk. And then, of course, we break into the camera-specific groups to discuss camera-specific problems. Spring classes, there is still open enrollment then. Fundamentals hasn't started yet, and Intro to Photoshop Editing are starting both very, very soon. So there is still time to sign up for those, for the spring classes. End of the year competition is underway. The deadline for submission of all images is March 31st, and our award ceremony is going to be May 19th. Upcoming field trip, we have Sandy Ridge, again, which was really popular when we did it about 1.5 years ago, out in Lorain County Metro Parks. Again, there's more information on our website about that. And of course, my pictures again from the Wilds field trip. I think there are a few, it's for members, students, and now I think they've opened it up to family members as well. I think there are a few spots left for that. That's down by the Columbus area. That's May 31st. And Deb Willis has put out our new issue of The Darkroom Door, which is really phenomenal. The fall issue, Fall 2022, is currently available. The CPS website homepage, just click on, I have the announcement there, and click on the link, and it'll take you right to it. Again, a lot of images showcased there, a lot of articles. Again, a good issue. And of course, tonight and all of our regular public meetings are on our YouTube channel. Just go to our homepage, click on the YouTube icon, and then go to the live section, and you'll be able to view any of these either at the time or on demand. So, and we get underway, tonight we're going to have Paul Lender talk on tintype photography, and Paul will tell us a little bit more about himself, but Paul is based in Northeast Ohio. In 2010, he started Left of Center Photography, a digital portrait business. He did children and family, and a few years later, started to do high school seniors, weddings, corporate work, and in 2016, again expanded to include professional dance. And during the pandemic, he turned his interest to tintype photography and has incorporated that into his work, and it is really phenomenal. And he's born and raised in Northeast Ohio, And without any further ado, let me introduce to you Paul Lender.
Thanks.
Paul, I'll get your stuff up.
Thanks. Oh, you don't got to clap yet. You haven't seen what I've done. Hold your applause till you find out if I'm worth it. So yeah, I'm Paul Lender. As mentioned, I started a photography business back in 2010. Prior to that, though, this is what we'll go through. Prior to that, though, how I got here is I actually took up the hobby of photography in middle school, probably like a lot of folks, right? You get exposed in high school or middle school to someplace that has a dark room, and you're learning how to wide film and load canisters, and shot with an old Canon AE1 program. Carried that, 2010, created my digital photography business that was really sort of driven out of a need to find ways to buy more lenses. Again, I'm sure we're all familiar with that problem. I had been posting pictures of my kids at the time, were about 7 and 5, posting a lot of pictures of them on social media, and people saying, those are really good pictures of your kids. And I said, well, I can take really good pictures of your kids for a few bucks. And it just sort of kept rolling on its own, and eventually turned into a business. Did weddings for a number of years, as mentioned. Sometime in that mid-2000s era, 2005, 2006, you might recall Tintype's got a little bit of a boost in popularity. There had been some pictures that were taken at a film festival out in Vail. There were Tintypes of some celebrities, and it got a little bit of a boost, and people were really oohing and awing over all of the defects that you can get on a Tintype photo if you're not really clean with your process, and how unique those were, and sort of how vintage it looked. And that got me interested in doing it too. I just didn't do anything about it for a long, long time for a number of reasons. But then in 2020, you know, we all got shut down and we were forced to stay home. I wasn't driving my kids to ballet rehearsals and sports practices. I had a 4x5 camera sitting in my basement that I hadn't used very often. And I said, you know what? I think it's time to figure out this whole Tintype process. And at that point, 2010, there were a number of companies now that were making sort of starter kits with the chemistry, so it was pretty easy to get everything you needed for a couple $100 and start making some photos. So that photo there, if you're into Tintype photography at all, you're on social media, especially Instagram, I encourage you to go follow Joe Wyman, Joe Wyman Photo. Joe Brown, Wyman is his middle name, that's what he uses on social media, but Joe Brown travels the US in a van, does portrait pop-ups all over the place, probably one of the best Tintype portrait photographers in the US right now. Absolutely incredible work. So that was a photo he took of me back June 2020 in my backyard. Uh-oh. Where'd they go? Oh, yeah, all right. Well, that's the right one. I was looking for a quote to put in here about Tintype photography after reading some books and doing some other things online. I don't know why it's gone, though, there. Huh? All right. Yeah, all right. Well, yeah, we'll run it this way. That works for me. I just left this in here because I couldn't find a quote on Tintype photography that really fit what I wanted to talk about. And this was in the template that I downloaded, and I just thought, you know, it's kind of inspiring. So, why wet plate, right? There's all these easier ways to do photography, far easier ways to do photography, right? Digital is very easy to do. Film photography is a little more challenging, right? You probably have to know a little bit more about metering, and maybe you're developing your own stuff and you're making prints in a dark room. You know, collodion, this all starts in a bottle, and I have to pour it on a plate. But why? Once I did the first one and I poured the first plate, I really got, you know, just fell in love with this tangible part of this process. Every collodion photo begins in a tangible space. I'm touching everything I need to make it. I touch everything while I take the photo. I touch everything while I develop the photo. And then it never has to live digitally. So it can completely be between me and my subject, and nobody else could ever know about it unless we take a photo of it with our phone, or by chance I happen to scan it, unless you maybe walk into their house, right, or they have it in their office and you're friends with them and you go and you see a really cool photo on the shelf and you ask them what that was, they're completely tangible. And that just is, in this digital age, I think that's really, really, really fascinating. The thing with it was, though, I thought at this time I would take collodion photography, wet plate collodion process, and as mentioned, right, I do dance photography and all these other things that I do for pay, but there's things that I want to do sort of personally and just want to be, personal work. But as any of you know that get paid for any of your hobbies, right, it starts to get hard to separate and find time to do the personal stuff. You'd rather do the money stuff, right? It's just, you fill up your calendar with that really quickly. So I thought, well, nobody's going to want to pay for collodion photography. Nobody, I can do all the personal work I want with this. And people caught wind of the fact that I was doing collodion photography, and I started doing collodion photography for money really, really quickly. I now do more digital personal work than I do collodion work. It flip-flopped on me. Was a happy problem to have to some extent. So these photos here, that's Landry Dermond, another Tintype photographer. He's based in the Washington, D.C. area. I'll talk a little bit about Camp Tintype, where I took that photo later on. That's Cassandra. I forget Cassandra's last name right now. She is also a wet plate collodion photographer based out of Michigan. So here's the things you need to do collodion photography, right? The tools of the trade. You've got these jars of collodion. You can get as deep into this as you want. You can buy pre-made collodion. So right, it comes in a jar ready to pour on a plate and take a photo. You can buy cadmium and iodine and bromine and ether and grain alcohol and set yourself up a little lab in your basement and start to mix all that stuff together if you want. I go this method. Actually, I go with a two-part method, so I get an A and a B, and I tend to mix them together just because collodion has a bit of a shelf life. So if I can mix stuff a couple weeks ahead of time, I know it'll be that sweet spot for me to use. Fixer is another thing. It's hypo. Same thing you would use for film, you can use in this case. There's a couple different fixers. Potassium cyanide is what they would have used in the 1860s. Still, some folks use it today. It does add a really unique aesthetic to the photos. This little shot glass down here is not cough medicine. That's the developer. It's an iron-based developer, so it gets rusty looking really quick. It starts out white, but it ages in a day or two into this sort of rust color. This is my camera, a primary camera that I use these days. That's a Burke & James commercial view camera from about 1940, so it doesn't go quite back as far as the collodion process, but it looks the part. It's all walnut and nickel-plated fittings on it, that sort of thing. It's a Bausch & Lomb lens, also from about the 40s. It looks really steampunk, and it's really kind of a piece of garbage. It's not very sharp. I don't use it. I just put it on the camera because it makes the photo look cooler than the more modern lens I use today. The back of the camera up here, very similar to what you have sitting on back of the camera back there in the corner, right? This is, in this case, it's a 5x7 spring-loaded back with the ground glass on it. I have backs that are 4x5 and 5x7 and 8x10. So again, with this process, you have to have, the size you shoot is the size you get, right? There's no reproduction of anything. I primarily shoot 4x5 and 5x7, just for a number of reasons around how much chemistry you start to use when you get into 8x10s. And then this is typically what your fingers look like after a day of shooting the collodion process. The silver nitrate you use gets on your skin, and it combines with the chlorine on your skin, and it becomes light sensitive. So as soon as then you go out in the sunlight, your fingers get stained brown, and it lasts for about a week, and it goes away. If you're really busy, you're going to have it on your forehead and up your arms, on your elbows, and everywhere else, working inside your dark box. And I would say also, as I go through this stuff, I mean, I'll definitely take questions at the end, but feel free to interrupt me. So I'm just going to go through the process. I didn't bring really any photos of the process, just because typically it's me doing it by myself. So it's kind of hard to get photos, but these are the 8 steps that happen when you're making a tintype or a wet plate collodion photo. You're going to pour collodion onto a piece of aluminum, a piece of glass, a piece of tin, polycarbonate, whatever you want that photo to be on. You're going to pour collodion onto there. You're going to let it start to dry. So it's going to get a little bit like maple syrup, right? It's going to be a little tacky. It's going to stay on that plate. Once it starts to get tacky, you're going to put it into a silver nitrate bath. Actually, I had right here in the back, this is my silver nitrate bath. That little guy there is filled up with silver nitrate. Goes in there, and the chemistry in the collodion, the cadmium and bromine and iodine, start to combine with the silver nitrate that's in the tank, and they become light sensitive. So at that point, you're working in a dark room. It's not red light sensitive, right? So you can be in a red light situation the entire time you're working with this process. But that process takes about 4 to 7 minutes, depending on the temperature it is, the density of your silver nitrate, the age of your collodion, all sorts of influences, how long that process is going to take, and the density of silver you're going to get onto that plate. But 4 to 7 minutes is a sweet spot. You're going to then take that out after it's sensitized for 4 to 7 minutes. You're going to load it into a film carrier, just like one of your 4x5 large format film carriers. You can find folks that make specific carriers for the collodion process that don't have the sort of middle baffle in them. But the hobbyist that you sort of have to be in this process, you can take a 4x5 film carrier and just cut the middle out and put some little wire in the corner to hold your plate in place, and you get one far cheaper than one that you would have made. You're going to go out and expose your photo once you get into that carrier. And from that point, it's kind of like shooting film, right? You're going to focus on your ground glass. You'll load your film in there, pull the slide out, tell your subject to stay very still or hope the wind doesn't blow if you're taking pictures of flowers or something like that, right? Because your exposure is 3 seconds to 30 seconds plus, depending again on your f-stop of your lens, how old your collodion is. Collodion gets slower as it gets older, so it starts at about an ISO of about 0.75, and it just goes down from there. The more it ages, the slower it gets. It also gets more contrasty as it gets older, so that can influence what your appearance of your image is like. The quality of sunlight, right? Collodion does not see red. It stops sort of being sensitive to light in the blue spectrum area. So golden hour is not a good time for a collodion photographer to be out. I like to be out between like 9 a.m. and 11 and 1 and 5 or 6. It starts to get later in the evening and then you start to get into golden hour. That light starts to get red. It's going to start to make your photos look really dark. Develop it. So developing is just sort of an art, again, sort of an art and feel depending on your collodion recipe and the recipe you use to make your developer as to how fast it all happens. But you're going to pour your developer onto that plate and you're going to watch for highlights and shadows to show up, and then you're going to stop it with water. Really simple to stop it with water, rinse it off, take it out. At that point, it's not light sensitive anymore once you've developed it and stopped the developer. So you can take it out. You remove the excess silver with your fixer. I sort of said that. Ammonium thiosulfate, sodium thiosulfate, whatever you might want to use there, potassium cyanide. That takes anywhere from a minute or so to happen. As your fixer gets older, it takes longer and longer. Rinse it again. You spend a lot of time rinsing, you'll notice, right? This is about a 10 to 20 minute rinse. You really want to get all that chemistry out of there. If you leave any of that fixer behind in the plate, it's going to continue to eat away at the silver that's in the plate, and eventually your image is going to get dark. Or if you didn't wash it thoroughly, you may just get spots where you don't get it all out, and then you're going to get dark pinholes over time. There's going to be this little void show up in the picture. And finally, at the end, after you've done this, you let it dry. I usually let my plates dry just in the room overnight, 24 hours, let them get good and dry. And you're going to put a varnish on them. And that varnish can be spray acrylic enamel. Historically, it was Sanderac varnish, gum Sanderac varnish, or shellac. The purpose there really is twofold. The collodion film that's left on your plate is still fairly fragile, so it's pretty easy to scratch. The other part is that image is pure silver, so it will tarnish if you don't protect it from oxygen. So you want to seal it in to keep it from changing color and to keep it from getting scratched up. If you do all this right, you're going to get a plate that'll last 170 years. And I have a bag of them up here, you guys, we can take a look at after I'm done. But, the collodion process has proven itself to be very, very durable. So, a plate that's well shot, well taken care of, definitely becomes a family heirloom. I think that's another part of the appeal for folks that come and see me about it, right? Is they know they're going to get a photo that they can pass on and on and on. So I said in 2020, COVID shut us down and I decided to make plates. And I really thought the hardest part of the process would be sort of getting this collodion to stay on the plate. Instead, it was really starting to learn how to read what my exposures were doing as I developed things. These are the first 4 plates I made. That's plate number 1. That's plate number 4. So you can kind of see, if you know what you're looking for there, a pair of ballet point shoes hanging on my fireplace mantle. You can maybe even see the ribbons a little bit there. The other thing you'll notice on this is there's some lines going across it, and that's because I was pulling the slide out and making test exposures 4 seconds at a time or something like that, letting them build up to figure out where I needed to be. Completely overexposed, completely overdeveloped. It took me a while. Oh no. What happened to it? Are they all gone? Did it not? Is this connected to the... That's weird. Yeah. Where'd all my pictures go? Yeah. Is this connected to the internet?
Yes.
Because I can pull it up on my Google Drive.
Okay.
If we take a break.
We'll take it. We're going to take a
Quick.
Taking a short break, and we're just going to reconnect up here as well. So. Go here. Are they on? See if they're on that one. Okay, we got things going again. We'll get back underway.
There is one thing you learn about this process is you don't panic during it, because things always go wrong. So these are my first 4 plates. Everything went wrong. I wasn't sure, how I was going to figure it out. I phoned a friend, and I'm just going to jump sort of into this where I really started to learn how to do this process, right? A lot of YouTube. At that point, I was like, I got to sit down and watch a lot of YouTube. The little 4-page letter on how to, instruction manual on how to do tintypes that came with my kit from Bostic and Sullivan just didn't cut it. I have no idea how many YouTube tintype wet plate collodion videos I watched. There's a lot of really good ones out there. There's a lot of really bad ones out there. Probably some of mine that are out there now could be included on both sides of that description. I started finding some friends. Here, Joe, this is Joe Brown, the guy I mentioned there who took my photo. I had a friend up in Canada, Jim Cost, who did the process a little bit. I was messaging him back and forth on Facebook Messenger. Greg Martin, I don't know if anybody here knows Greg. Greg's a Cleveland photographer, does this process really, really well. One day I hope to shoot tintypes as well as Greg does. Danny's a photographer out of the DC area as well, and there's Cassigan being a subject for him. But yeah, find friends. I mean, we're right, this is a room full of photographers, right? Tintype folks are the same way. We want to share the process. We love it. There's no secrets to it. We've all got our little special sauce that we sort of develop over the years, but we love to talk shop, right? I mean, that's why we're all here. And I got with all those guys, and I started making some progress. Plate number 5, right? A couple days later, after talking to some folks and watching some YouTube videos, I got an image I could see. It's got all kinds of problems. I burnt the collodion with the developer pour, and it's overexposed, which is why it's all sort of hazy looking, and it's overdeveloped, which is why it's all hazy looking, and all this crud around the edges is because I didn't clean my film holder well enough in between plates. But hey, this was the best photo I'd ever taken at that point, right? It's my daughter. A couple days later, plate 12, and I probably kept track of the first 50 plates. So this was plate 12. She felt in this process that because it was an old vintagey photo, it had to be like American Gothic. Every photo I wanted to take of her early on, she was like trying to hold a rake or a pitchfork. This little blue defect is another defect. You can see this plate's like a lot cleaner, right? It doesn't have that haze over it. There's all that crud around the edges is gone. But I got this little blue thing going on here, which I didn't think much of at the time. But that's a defect called solarization, and it's from not rinsing my developer off well enough before bringing the plate out into the light. I didn't find that out for about 6 more months. I just got lucky for a long time without seeing that very often. But then you get into the photograph, right? And some of it was, what's it like bringing this process into how I shoot photography? And it's a lot. I have a portable dark box. It's just sort of a suitcase style dark box that I take out on location with me. There's my camera set up on a tripod. This is Maddie Campbell. Maddie dances with the Cleveland Ballet Company. She's a beautiful ballerina. She came to my house. I was doing a digital series at the time based on the Venus de Milo statue. So hopefully you see a little bit of a resemblance there. So we took a number of photos of her. Probably spent about 4 hours to make 5 photos, to make 5 plates. So that's one of the challenges of this process for sure, is that it's time consuming. Your own personal time, which in my case, right, I'm the guy doing it. I find it very relaxing to spend 5 hours making wet plate collodion photos. But to put somebody in front of my camera for a personal project and get 5 hours of their time is a lot to ask, or at least it feels like it. When they see the photos and they totally get the process, a lot of them are very grateful to be part of it and really enjoy being part of it. Maddie absolutely loves the plates we made of her. So there's a couple other ones that we had done at the same time. And that's really where I try to go with the process, is I try to use the process the same way I would take a digital photo. I try to put my clients in the same positions, the same poses. I want them to be that same frame of mind. I don't want to just stand them up and sort of take a mug shot of them. Or make it into a parlor trick, which I do, and I'll admit I do that. I do portrait pop-ups where I have people just come in, and they stand in front of my camera, and I put off 4,800 watt seconds of flash, big old Speedotron flashes, which you can see right there is one of them, 3 feet away from Maddie's face. That's 2,400 watt seconds of light going off right in her face. You make a lot of money doing that, be honest with you. And people think it's cool. They enjoy the novelty of it, right? But they're kind of boring photos to do over and over and over again. This is fun. This is the fun stuff. So yeah, that's making the photo, and this is the challenges with making the photo and bringing it into any sort of process working with a client, right? It's learning to slow down. Like I said, each one of these photos, if I'm hustling through a portrait pop-up event, I'm doing 3 tintypes an hour. That's like not having to question the exposure every time I make it. People are going to stand exactly where I put them. I've got lights set up. I'm not figuring anything out, right? It's just on autopilot. I just put somebody up there, pour a plate, develop it, put somebody up there, pour a plate, develop it, put somebody up there. But if you're going to go out and work with somebody, I'm going to take your photo. The beard, the hat, fantastic. You'd be a good tintype guy, right? You'd sit down, you'd look rustic, Everybody looks super rustic in a tintype photo, especially you give them a beard and everything. You're going to talk about the process, and you're going to discuss the light, and you're probably going to turn them a couple different ways as you try to work everything out. But again, digital photos, you can snap off 20 real quick, right? I can spin you around in a chair and take 15 photos in less than a minute. 15 photos are going to take me 6 hours to do tintypes. So I've got to be really, really deliberate with everything I do when I'm setting up my image. It's a lot of stuff. I think the next slide is what it looks like when I go on location to shoot. You'll see 2 piles of gear that I take with me. It's seeing a new light. This is a really hard one to grasp. The tintype process is mostly UV light sensitive. It is not visible light sensitive past blue. So you can't get a picture of the sky with clouds in it because everything turns white. Try to take a landscape photo. Really, really tough to do. People with blue eyes turn out really cool because their eyes turn white. All you see is their little dark pupils in the middle. People with freckles. Freckles really pop because they're red, right? They don't send any light back to the collodion, so they get really, really dark. They really pop. Redheads, freckles in front of the camera. Again, a fantastic subject for tintype photography. People that wear little red shirts, right? They come up and they wear a red shirt over whatever. It's going to be black. So you got to think of green. Stuff that's green turns dark. Kids with suntan lotion on or makeup that's UV protectant, right? Eyeglasses that change color in UV light all turn black. So I didn't bring it. I have a tintype I took that first year I was doing it of 7 little kids in a hot tub at a beach party. All of them but one had on sunscreen. There's 5, 6 black faces and one little kid who, I'm like, I know who didn't have sunscreen on. But I do. People come in to take pop-up photos. Do you have blue light sensitive lenses on? Do you have transition lenses on? They're going to turn black. They're like, I don't know. They're like, I don't know. I'm like, well, we'll find out. We'll find out in a photo. People who put on makeup, women who put on makeup that might have UV protectant stuff in it. I tell a lot of my female clients, don't put on a lot of makeup when you're going to show up unless you know for sure that it doesn't, because your skin's going to get really, really dark. Sunburn. I have, again, another one I didn't include. It was an early one on where I was learning this lesson, though. I took a maternity photo of a girl who had just gotten back from a vacation in Mexico. She was sunburnt. She's totally black. Didn't look anything like her. Cleanliness. You saw on that plate, that very first plate, right? All that stuff around the sides that's dirty, and some people think it looks really cool. In fact, I would say in 2005, when I first saw the process, I was like, oh, those defects are really cool. They make every photo so unique. And then as I got into the process, started learning where they come from, I'm like, oh, somebody was just really, really lazy. They just didn't clean their stuff. And I started seeing old tintypes from the 1860s and 70s. They don't have those defects. They're pristine. So it's just cleanliness. And it's hard to do because everything's wet. Everything's covered in silver nitrate. And this chemistry gets everywhere. And then you got to maintain the chemistry. You get the alcohol that's in your collodion will build up in the silver nitrate and throw off the density of your silver or the pH. So you've got to do things to maintain your silver density and your pH. And again, as your collodion gets old, it starts to change. As your varnish gets old, if you're using a Sanderac varnish or a shellac and the solvent starts developing out of it, it's going to get thicker and it's going to pour different. So you got to maintain that by adding more solvent to it occasionally. There's all these things that just more things you have to do. Wooden plate holders. I 3D print my plate holders now. Wooden plate holders I use because they absorb all that moisture while I'm shooting, right? And they start to swell and the dark slide starts to get hard. And you can't get all that wet stuff off of there, so you're always getting marks around the edges. So yeah, it's just a cleanliness thing. It's just a lot of that part of it doing it. As I just said, be willing to make the things you need. Finding parts for that camera back there in the corner is probably really, really hard. Finding parts for my camera from the 1940s, the little knobs that control the tilt shift. Never gonna find those someplace, right? I can 3D print them. Fortunately, I have a 3D printer. I can 3D print plate holders up to 5x7. I can 3D print or make, every wet plate guy I talk to has probably made a box to carry his plates in home from shooting on location so they don't bang around and get scratched. So we're all sort of crafty that way, and you just have to be when you start working with old stuff. Anybody who's into anything vintage or antique, be it cars or cameras or whatever, right? You're making stuff you need to keep going with that. And then I sort of hit on this one already, just taking time from others. Because I do, when I sit down and start to make plates, I have an idea what I want to do in my head, and I've got to worry about all of these things too, and getting it right. So I do. We take a photo and we both look at it. I have the client come over and we look at it and we decide what we like about it and what we don't like about it, and we go back in and get them under there. So it can be a very time-consuming process, and it can be a lot to ask, somebody to give you that kind of time. So this is what I take. If I go out to shoot like a portrait pop-up event, or maybe I'm going out to shoot a wedding portrait and I know I'm going to be inside and I have to take flashes. It gets a little bit smaller if I don't have to take flashes, because I don't have to take these Speedotron packs and these big reflectors and C-stands. The process is very, very water intensive, so I usually travel with 7 to 14 gallons of water so that I can do all those rinse steps in my process. Sandbags, either sandbagging down my tent or I'm sandbagging down the table I have my dark box on, because last summer I had my dark box blow over and it spilt my silver nitrate, and that was a tragedy. Bunch of reflector things, all kinds of trays, apple crates, because again, it's a process where you want to get people on the same level, right? You don't got a lot of space and flexibility with the camera to move it around. It's on a big tripod, and I've only got one lens. It's just all this stuff you have to haul. So this takes me about 20 or 30 minutes to load into my car. It takes me about 20, 30 minutes to load into wherever I'm taking the photos. So to only take 1 or 2 photos, right, that's going to take me 40 minutes or an hour, and then take 20 or 30 minutes to load it all back into my car, 20 or 30 minutes to load it all back in my house. Like, that's the other part. When I get someplace, I want to camp out. I want to take photos all day. Like, let's do it. I brought all this stuff out here. We're going to stick around. So finding somebody or somebodies that's going to be willing to come around and do that with you. Mention the light thing. So it's a good example of the light thing. And I flipped this image around because, collodion photos are all backwards because they're just going through the single lens. But you can start to see how the colors change, right? Blues become light, your black, your reds here start to get a little bit darker, your green gets a little bit darker. So this is to be aware of. You think putting somebody in a red shirt in front of a green foliage background, right? You take a digital photo, like they're gonna pop out on that. This process, they turn into a floating head. Like, you don't see any of that, right? They just completely disappear. And I had a hard time with that early on. It took me a lot of Tintype plates to finally kick it into my head that, like, you can't do that anymore. You did that when you were doing digital photography.
That picture must have taken a lot of time.
This one here, yeah, they sat there a long, long time. Yeah. Again, stuff that's always cool in Tintype photos, Halloween decorations. Like, I don't know. I showed a couple pictures of this earlier. This is Camp Tintype. This is kind of an inspirational place to be for Tintype photography in my mind. This gentleman right here is John Coffer. I urge you to look up John Coffer online. John has a website, surprisingly, because he lives completely off the grid in upstate New York. John credits himself, maybe I shouldn't say this on video because I know he sneakily watches YouTube sometimes. John credits himself with rebirthing the Tintype process in the United States. Back in the 80s, late 70s, early 80s, after visiting the Smithsonian, where he saw some wet plate collodion photos in person, he got really enamored with the process and started to hunt it down. And at the same time, he was living sort of off the grid. He traveled America in a horse and buggy the whole way around. New York to Washington, down through Texas, up through Florida. Found what he was looking for to do the process and get the process running again. And now he teaches classes at his farm in upstate New York. What's that?
Do you know where he is in upstate?
Yeah, he's like up by Dundee. Like, yeah. He does like weekend classes. You go, it's a handful of people, 3-4 people, it's $1,000, $2,000, I think. But he'll teach you the process like nobody else can teach you the process because he knows it better than anybody else. He's been doing it for, over 40 years. And the first time at Camp Tintype, I get lined up for this little shootout event they do, and I'm right across from John. I haven't made a plate all day, and it's like, you got one shot, make a plate. And then we're going to all show them to each other, right? Our photos are behind our cameras. I made my shot at John. It was probably one of the better exposures I made that day. Yeah, he's a great guy, really nice. But he does Camp Tintype where every fall, actually late summer, at the end of July, instead of teaching seminars for the weekend, he opens his camp up for free, his farm up for free, to anybody who shoots tintype. Anybody who's a wet plate collodion photographer, you send him a letter, tell him you're coming, just so he knows for the caterer how many meals to have ready. You drive up to his farm, you camp in his horse pastures, his cow pastures, and you make tintypes all weekend with 20 or 30 other people that are super, super passionate about tintype, just like you are. And I wasn't able to go there in 2020, the first year I started this process. I really, really wanted to. I had gotten into the process sort of too late. I found out about the camp too late in the year. I went the second year, and this was my camp year 2. I went up there, and I started to meet, this is Vanessa. She's in New Jersey. Fantastic. Richard Meller. He's in, I think, New England area. I was worried because I saw all these people. I followed them all on Instagram at that point, so I kind of knew who they were. I was definitely familiar with their work, and it's really good. And I go up there with imposter syndrome, right? Again, everybody in this room has probably had imposter syndrome, right? Am I good enough to be bringing photos to the critique thing in a couple of weeks? Am I good enough to enter photos in the contest? We're all good enough. Like, we just don't believe we're good enough. But I got up there, and I started seeing everybody make the same mistakes I make. Grungy stuff around the edges of their plates because they're in a rush trying to make plates before they lose the light, or they just frustrated with the process at that point. They just want to make the damn plate now because they've been trying to make it 3 exposures in a row, and none of them worked out. And like, who cares? I'm just going to try and force it through. We all have the same mistakes. We all make the same struggles. We all suffer the same pains. We all have stains on our hands. Like, we're all that. And then the other part of it was, the best part of it probably is I actually got to know these people. So now I'm on site, I'm doing tintypes, and I run into an issue, maybe a defect I haven't seen before. I can shoot out an Instagram message to a handful of these folks, and somebody's going to get back to me in 5-10 minutes. Try this. So it's a fantastic thing. I went to it last year. This year coming up will be the 41st year for Wet Plate for his camp, and he's dedicating it to the women of Wet Plate Collodion. So hopefully, because it is kind of an old white man's thing, hopefully we'll see, because there are some fantastic women shooters out there. Oh my gosh, some fantastic women shooters. I talked a little about the craft side of it. Be crafty. This was me making a ground glass spring back for a 4x5 camera for a friend who broke theirs, but I have the software and whatever to go do it, so just to find one of those without having to buy a whole back can sometimes be a pain. Here I bought a back that I thought was going to fit on my camera, and it didn't, so I had to sort of pop off the parts I needed and make a new frame to put that spring back holder on so that it would fit on my camera. We're shooting, and I shoot with an 80-year-old camera, not because I like to shoot with an 80-year-old camera. I shoot with an 80-year-old camera because it's part of the show. People show up and they know the process is 150 years old. They want to see a camera that's really, really old too. My camera weighs 17 pounds. I think my tripod weighs about 10 pounds. It's not fun to haul around anywhere. I'd much rather shoot with a brand new Toyo 8x10 that weighs like 7 pounds and is all aluminum and whatever, but it's just not the same effect when people come and see you and they want to get this done. And yeah, so we'll spend the last couple minutes here. I'm just going to quickly blow through some slides of some of the stuff I've taken. There's Joe. Joe and I have become really, really good friends. Turns out Joe is from the same small town my parents grew up in coal mining country in Pennsylvania. He posted one day after I started following him that he's like, nobody's ever heard of this town. And I was like, I know that my grandma lives in that town. Joe's been really, really helpful to me. I probably wouldn't have gotten as far in wet plate collodion photography without Joe. And he came to Cleveland not long after I started the process. I was sort of struggling through it. He was doing a portrait pop-up. I had to shoot a wedding the day of his portrait pop-up. Just on a flyer, I sent him a message through social media. It was like, hey, I can't come to your portrait pop-up. I'd love to talk shop, though. I'm new to the process. He's like, yeah, absolutely. Buy me, I'll meet you for coffee Sunday morning. Met for coffee. We talked for about an hour and a half over coffee, looking at plates. He says, I'm starting to drive across the country in this van. I'm trying to find wet plate collodion photographers as I travel across the country and take their photos with their cameras to eventually put together a portrait gallery in a couple of years. Would you be a part of it? I'm like, dude, I've only been doing this like 3 months. I don't think I'm a wet plate collodion photographer yet, but It's like, no, I insist, like, let's do it. So he came to my house. Joe spent the entire day at my house. We had dinner, we drank a lot of beers, we made a lot of tintypes. We became really good friends. And again, he was like, take my plate. Nobody ever takes a plate of me because I can't find another wet plate collodion photographer anywhere. Super nervous. Probably one of the most nervous plates I've ever made was taking this photo of Joe. And it started to rain while we were getting set up. I'm like, ugh, we're out here. But yeah, so great guy, follow him. This was from a portrait pop-up event. Redhead, if you look at this plate, not scanned, you can see all her freckles popping, and she looks fantastic. That's one of my favorite pop-up photos. Just a nice muslin background and a lot of artificial light. I said, everybody looks rustic. This is my nephew. It is beach house in some open shade a couple years ago on the 4th of July. These two here were the first clients to actually pay me to go take their photos. And he collects glass plate negatives. So he was well aware of the potential in the process and what he was getting himself into. Weddings. I'd been a wedding shooter for a long time. Weddings got to be a lot of work, 10-hour days, right? Plus another 10 or 15, 20 hours, sometimes editing photos and all that stuff. After the fact, wet plate collodion and weddings, I show up, I take one 8x10, I go home. Like, they're super thrilled, right? So this was the bride and groom at the wedding that kept me from going to Joe's pop-up. But I invited them back after I got a little bit better in the process and let me take your wedding photo this way. Also, another ballerina that I happened to do work with in the past got married, so we did some photos for her. These are two clients from a couple years ago. This one's in a basement, artificially lit. This one's outside. This here was, this is the plate drying out. The important part, I didn't even mention it, it's wet plate, right? The plate has to stay wet the entire time I'm doing this. If it starts to dry, the chemical reaction stops. It's like the most basic part of this. I forgot to mention it until almost the end. So I went and I poured this 8x10 plate and had them all posed. I went and poured the plate. It's doing its thing. I come back out. It's August. It's like 90 degrees. We're on a golf course. There's no shade really anywhere. And she starts fixing her makeup. And I'm like, I got this plate, we got to do the plate. We got to do the picture. And she's like, makeup, checking in the mirror. And she's the bride, right? You can't tell her to hurry up. I'm just sucking. I'm just sitting there. Yeah. So I'm just, sitting there waiting, whatever. We got it. It turned out really cool. I kind of liked it. They liked it. I thought it was a really sort of to that vintage, grungy sort of thing. It's just one of those things that happens. These spots right here, that's where I didn't wash out the fixer well enough. So that's going to continue to get black the longer and longer that plate sticks around. Maternity. I started doing maternity photos in this process last year, and I've really taken a liking to it. I think I think it just captures that portrait and pose really, really well for me. It's a friend of mine, actually a friend of mine's daughter, Bailey. I've taken her maternity photo twice now. This was with her first child, who's 2.5 now. These are two pictures of a dancer I had worked with at one point. I'd done ballet photos of her for her first child when she was about 8 months pregnant. So this time around we did collodion photos. This is another client I just did last year, her and her husband, also getting ready to have her firstborn coming up. This is another thing with collodion. I talked about it, how it reflects light. So this is sheer material. A digital photo, you would see all of her. But it traps enough of the light that the UV doesn't come bouncing back out through that white fabric where you don't get to see any of her skin underneath it where it's doubled up. But you would, if that was a digital photo like on my YouTube, I have a YouTube video of doing this session, and I had to blur out stuff. Ballet. Again, this was really where I thought I would go with this process when I set out to do it 3 years ago, that I would just take ballet photos with it. Ballet is hard to take with collodion because the exposures are long, 3 to 15 seconds, or you need a lot of light if you're going to stop them with flash. And Speedotron packs these days are $700 to $800, plus the 206 lights, the 4000 watt second lights are $400 or $500. So you can light a single Speedotron head, a 2400 watt second head will really only do a 3/4 headshot, a 3/4 headshot. It doesn't have enough power to go full body. It's got to be 3 feet away from them or so. So you need 3 or 4 lights like that, right? So it gets really expensive, and you can only really drive 2 off a pack. So you got to have a couple packs. And again, they're a lot to carry around. A Speedotron pack, if you ever picked one up, they weigh about 50 pounds, right? Like they're no fun to haul around anywhere. And I swear every time I turn that thing on, I think I'm going to die of electrocution. Plugging them in and like turning them on and powering them up, they're not fun to use. This was taken with a Speedotron though, a couple Speedotron lights. You can see my flashes didn't fire the first time, so she got this really cool shadow effect around her. This was a natural light photo. You can see the motion that comes in a 9 or 10 second exposure. And that's part of it, is this learning, this is what I want to do with the process. This are the limitations of the process. How can I be deliberate with that and make it part of the experience that I want in the image, right? It's nothing wrong with having a blurry photo if it's deliberate. So take advantage of that. Point shoes, I think I had somebody actually cheating on a bar here, so they stayed really, really still. Yeah, so that's the end. So I think you can take this. I'll get you another copy of this, so you can, I guess maybe if you want to put it up on your website and people can grab it. I order a lot of my stuff from these first two guys here, Bostic & Sullivan and UV Photographics. Bostic & Sullivan is in Arizona or New Mexico. UV Photographics is out in LA. I don't know where Artcraft is, but I give him a plug because he always gives away stuff at Camp Tintype. He's a really nice guy. I just started ordering from these two guys before I found out about him, and I just stay there. But they both sell pre-made collodion, they both sell silver, they both sell developer, they both sell fixer. They sell everything you need. They have starter kits, they sell aluminum plates. I buy my aluminum plates though from Maine Trophy. It's nothing special about the aluminum we use. It's just black powder coated trophy plate aluminum, like they put on all the trophies. It would say first place, Tommy, whatever. The chemistry I use, collodion guys, I guess we like to have a little fun. We give things Old Dead Bride, Old Workhorse, Leia's formula. They're all funky names. Collodions and the developers and that sort of stuff. This is what I typically, though, have around the house if I'm taking collodion photos. And then a couple of books. Chemical Pictures is a great guide to get started in this process with. Quinn's book. A lot of troubleshooting things in it. There's some recipes in it if you want to mix your own stuff, but if you get a defect, you can look it up in his book, and he's going to give you some ideas on what to do. Basic collodion technique from Scully and Osterman, also guys who are really, really well-versed in this process. I haven't read this book, but I know a lot of people who use this book and refer to it all the time. John has his own book, The Doer's Guide to Wet Plate. that I think is included if you go up there to his camp and you take it. I think he also sells it though on his website. Yeah, so there you go. And then I have a book up here called America and the Tintype, which if you just want to know what was going on in America in the 1850s when this process was invented here, the tintype process was invented in America. The wet plate collodion process was invented in Europe. There's a little bit of difference between the two, but they're sisters for sure. But it really talks about the socio-economic conditions that were going on in America in the 1850s and 60s and 70s, and why the tintype caught on in America the way it did. And one of the things I didn't realize until reading it really was that the tintype was an American love affair. You don't find a lot of tintype photos outside of the United States. You can find some in Europe, in Asia, but not in the numbers that you can go into in an antique shop in anywhere USA, and you can probably find little 2x3 inch, eighth plate tintypes today. And there's a lot that was going on in society that drove that. So it's a cool book to give you some insight on what's going on. Feel free. I love sharing this process. I love educating people on this process. I've done talks at schools. I did Hale Farms Civil War days last year. I was at Hale Farm shooting tintypes in their sheep barn and explaining the process to people and talking about the history of it there. I'm on Instagram, Cleveland Tintype. There's links to my other photographic stuff there as well. If you go to clevelandtintype.com, you'll find links to my other photography there as well. But yeah, feel free to reach out. I love sharing the process. So yeah, any questions? I don't know. Yeah.
Is there a way you can put a little hands-on?
Yeah, for sure. I just actually, that was the last one I did at a school was for a class, and we actually made some tintypes while we were there. Yeah, I can definitely do it. Like I said, it's a lot to set up, but I don't mind bringing everything and setting it up and walking people through the process at all. It's really, really cool. Yeah, I am doing, I do have a pop-up event coming up. It'll be posted on my social media. It'll be in Cleveland Heights in April in a couple of weeks. I'll have about 12 or 15 appointments available at that one. But yeah, I mean, I share it. If you search my name on YouTube, you can also find videos of me doing the process to see it. So there's some videos that sort of walk through a lot of it there. Yeah. Anybody else? Yeah.
Can you use other substrates other than metal?
Yeah, for sure. So originally the wet plate collodion process was developed on glass. So that's your glass plate negative, and it was developed as a negative process to make reproductive prints out of. So they would have done prints from a glass plate negative, and right, what most people know, besides sort of the Civil War soldier tintypes that you might see, would be like Brady's glass plate negatives from the Civil War, right? Those were a negative process that was done on glass plate negative, or an ambrotype is what it gets called. Put them on tin, right? You start to get into ferrotypes, but again, I know people who use like polycarbonate because they might find it easier to work with than cutting glass, or colored polycarbonate. Greg Martin did a really cool thing on records, on vinyl albums, like where he spun them in the camera and made a stop motion thing out of it. Yeah, anything you can put the collodion on and get into the back of a camera, you can do. The other part is you don't have to use a 80-year-old view camera. I've loaded little 35 millimeter plates into an old Pentax. I know people who use old Polaroids. Like anything you can load a plate into, you can make a tintype with. Or a wet plate collodion photo with, yeah. Yeah. The thing you got to watch out for is there's solvent, right? There's grain alcohol in the collodion, and so you just don't want something that the solvent's going to affect the surface of, right? But that's the only thing to watch out for. I mean, it's not that bad. Yeah, question 2?
Yeah, when you put the collodion on the plate, do you paint it on?
So you pour it. So it's like putting syrup on your pancakes, right? So I hold a plate in my hand and I'm going to pour about 5 or 10 milliliters of collodion onto that plate, and you just skill, time, practice, learn how to not have it pour out all over your hand and onto your workbench and everywhere else. You learn to stop it with surface tension right at the edge, and then you tip it back up and you pour off one corner back into the bottle or into a pour-off bottle so you can use that excess over again. A 4x5 plate's really, really easy to do it with. A 5x7 gets a little bit harder, or it's a little bit bigger to balance in your hand. Go to an 8x10. There are people that shoot 11x14. Oh gosh, his name escapes me right now. Greg, in that photo we showed up there of Greg shooting the plate, I think that was an 11x14 plate, right? That's a big plate to pour collodion on and get into a sensitizing tank. I think he said his tank for that plate holds about 2.5 gallons of silver nitrate. Silver right now is about $70 a pound, or $70 for 100 grams. So that's a lot of silver, right, that you're carrying around everywhere with you.
Didn't they use silver hagel? I don't know what the difference is.
So daguerreotypes were silver. I have daguerreotype samples too, right? So daguerreotype was 1839, 1840-ish. A little bit different process, a polished silver mirror that they fumed mercury onto. Much slower, much less sensitive to light, much less robust, which you see fewer daguerreotypes around because they didn't tend to fix as permanently as collodion photos did. But yeah, a little bit more dangerous process, a little bit more involved process. Part of the appeal of collodion, right, was that it took an exposure time from a couple of minutes to 30 seconds or so, maybe. Also took the cost down from, a couple of bucks to, I think today they say it was probably $2-3 equivalents to pay for a collodion photo back in the 1860s. Yeah. Yeah.
So you were explaining the process of putting the stuff on. So then does it get to the point after you pour some off that, it doesn't?
Yeah, so that's what I was saying. You sort of got to let it dry, right? So you start to so the collodion is cotton. Basically, it's cotton dissolved in ether and grain alcohol, along with cadmium, bromide, lithium, whatever you want that other salt to be. And so you pour it on, you start to let all that solvent evaporate out so that it starts to become tacky. And again, that's just one of those things, like if it's humid, it's going to take longer. If it's really dry, it's going to happen faster. You just got to start to know and watch it. My early plates all had my thumb in the corner, right? I was touching it to see if it was tacky enough. I think everybody's early plates has their thumb in it. So yeah, so it's all a matter, and that's the other part of it. So much is you can read all you want to about how to do this process, but there's no like set a timer for 2 minutes and then do this. Like you got to watch it and see. Like it's changes with temperatures, it changes with humidities, it changes with the light level, and winter UV light is different than summer UV light. So it's just all these things of doing it. Yeah. Yeah.
I actually have two questions.
Sure.
One is simple one. Is it toxic?
Sorta. Yeah, I mean, right, so ether's highly flammable. It's pretty stable in this, but it's gonna, there's not a lot in a jar of collodion, but if you're somebody who's gonna mix your own collodion and you're gonna buy straight ether, you're gonna wanna stabilize it with like isopropyl alcohol or something like that. You're gonna wanna learn how to do that process as well. So yeah, I don't keep, that's another reason, like I just don't mix my own. Like I don't wanna deal with having a jug of ether around my house. If you use potassium cyanide as your fixer, definitely, right? Dangerous. Bromides, if you inhale bromides in a powder form, like they can be they can be cancer-causing agent. Here it's dissolved, so it's less likely. But yeah, I mean, there's definitely some. I think flammability is what most of us get caught up with the most is grain alcohol and ether. There's grain alcohol in the varnish. There's grain alcohol in the collodion. There's ether in the collodion. There's a little bit of alcohol in the developer. There's a lot of flammable stuff around. Yeah.
Second question is more kind of an aesthetic question.
Yeah.
You're using a very old procedure, and I noticed that some of your pictures are more like the subject, and the setup is more consistent with the era,
Yeah.
but some of them are jarringly modern.
Yeah.
And I wonder what the
My-
aesthetic of it, what you think.
My personal take is I would rather do the jarringly modern stuff using the old technique. That's where I want to go with it. I say for the pop-ups though, that's sort of old school, what they would have done, right? And that's what that clientele wants to get. There are certainly people like, right, the bride and grooms or the maternity, the mothers to be there, right, who sort of get the process and they want the aesthetic, but they still want the modern photo. They just don't want to stand there. You know, I'd much rather do the modern thing. I mean, there are folks that do the old school mugshot thing, and they do it really, really well. They've got fantastically sharp lenses and a lot of light, and they can pull those photos off, and they look fantastic. One of my favorite photos, a couple of my favorite photos, are photos Joe has done in that pop-up, right? They're just mugshots. They're just the parlor tricks. But it's my wife. There's a photo of my wife and I. It's like my wife's like, that's the favorite photo I've ever had taken of us. It's a photo Joe took, and it's just a mugshot in front of a black background. Yeah. Yeah, I'd much rather do the drawings, the modern stuff. Yeah, for sure.
Could you say something just about why the negative you get looks positive against the black background?
Yeah.
Important point about Tintype.
Yeah, right. So that's where. There's a couple things you do in the process. So the wet plate collodion process was invented in 1851 in England, and it was a negative image process, shot on glass. They were making, prints from that if they needed to. When it came to the U.S. Later in the 1850s, they realized shortening the exposure time and shortening the development time would give you a positive image. So you put it on a black background now, and you see your positive image, right? And that's the big difference. It's
Actually, it's because the silver looks light,
and that's because you're stopping.
it's reflecting,
Yeah,
it's reflecting.
and that happens because you're shorting the development process. So like if I did the same process and I increased my if I did my exposure 2 stops longer, if I did a 30-second exposure for 2 minutes, and instead of developing it for 10 seconds, I developed it for a minute, I would actually end up with a negative image.
Well, actually, you end up with a negative, the shortened development process just keeps more silver in there, which you need for the reflection.
Yeah,
Right, like an ambrotype, if you look at an ambrotype,
yeah.
it's a glass negative, right?
Until you put it on something black.
You put it on something black and it's positive.
Yeah, I have some here. Yeah. Yeah, it's just a matter of sort of tweaking the process. But it really was shortening the process, shortening the development that got you to your Tintype positive.
That's actually what kept more silver on it.
Yeah.
is the black background.
Yeah.
which you can
Yeah. I think we're saying the same thing.
cross. I know you understand.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, so like I said, I have a stack of 1870s Tintypes up here. I have some of my modern Tintypes up here if you want to take a look or ask other questions or whatever. But I appreciate your time. And yeah, glad I had the opportunity to come out and talk to you. Yeah,
Thank you, Paul.
sure.
Thank you. Yep. Come on, he's got a bunch of them up here. Feel free, come on up. Enough to.